Tolkien once said, "In The Lord of the Rings, the conflict is not basically about freedom, though that is naturally involved. It is about God and his sole right to divine honor." Welcome to Intermarifica, New Mexico, the channel where we look at wonders from the perspectives of faith and reason, philosophy and theology. I'm your host, Daniel Kelly. Today, I wanted to look at a book I recently read that I really enjoyed called The Fall of Numenor. This book is a compilation and curated, edited version of a lot of Tolkien's work put together, kind of like the great tales that Christopher Tolkien put together, but it's not by Christopher Tolkien. It's by Brian Sibley, because Christopher Tolkien has passed away now, and I just want to look at is it as good as Christopher Tolkien's great tales, and just how good is it? Now, I'm not a Tolkien expert. I've read The Lord of the Rings, Silmarillion, and the great tales, and some other little things, but I think that that's actually an advantage here because I'm the target audience for this book. This book isn't for people who have read the 12 volumes of the history of Middle-earth. I want to read that, but haven't read it yet. This continues the great tradition of Christopher Tolkien saying, hey, here's a really good story in Tolkien's massive amounts of notes and work. Let's put it together in one place from all those different places so people could read it. And when I first read the Silmarillion, I was doing it kind of like a chore, like I gotta read this, and I didn't really enjoy it the first time I read it. And the one thing I remembered, though, from my first reading was the story of the fall of the island kingdom of Numenor. I didn't remember any of the other great tales that Tolkien called them, which I've come to love, especially like the Fall of Gondolin. I've come to love that, reading Christopher Tolkien's compilation and all that. But the first time I read it, the only story that stuck out to me later, until I've read the Silmarillion more, and I actually like the Silmarillion a lot now, but was the Fall of Numenor. So I was excited to do this review. So the Fall of Numenor is kind of a prequel to the Lord of the Rings. I hate to say prequel because that's been so messed up in our modern age. It's not like these stories where you're like, hey, this is a really popular thing, let's fiddle around with the characters' backstories and stuff. No, it was part of the story that Tolkien already had that just basically didn't get published. It's the background you need to know, like who Isildur is and why is the conflict with Sauron really about religious freedom and right worship more than freedom. So it's not like the Rings of Power, thank goodness. And it's not even like something like the Star Wars prequels that George Lucas was kind of making up after he made the original trilogy, even though I love the Star Wars prequels. So you might not trust my opinion after hearing that, but just going to give a brief overview, and really there aren't any deep spoilers, but if you want to be completely, totally spoiler-free, just go buy the book and stop watching this video. So it's a story of an island kingdom that after the defeat of the first big bad, the first evil dude in the story of Middle-earth, Morgoth, who's basically kind of like the devil, he's defeated by the Valar, which are somewhat similar to angels. They're basically angels. So after that, the humans that had aided in fighting Morgoth, most of the humans had joined him, but the ones that had aided fighting him get rewarded with this kind of paradisical island kingdom that's close to the realm of the gods, close to the realm of the Valar, right? And it has all kinds of blessings, and the people there live a really long time, and they get wisdom and all these good rewards, and that's what Numenor is this island kingdom that's kind of as close as people can get to paradise after the fall. But twist, they can't, to keep this paradise, they can't sail towards the kingdom of the gods past a certain point, right? There's this ban, this prohibition, and Tolkien says any story of humankind, of mankind, is gonna involve this ban or prohibition. That's the way to make good stories. And the story of Numenor reminds me very much of the story of Babel in the Bible, where we miss it sometimes in the translations that we have, but they're trying to build a tower so they can attack heaven. And you'll see as I go through the story of Numenor how that is similar. In this story, it's setting up Sauron as the new main big bad guy. He was one of Morgoth's followers, one of these lesser angels, lesser spirits, called the Maya. But he, once Morgoth is defeated and the gods leave Middle-earth, he's still there, and he's like, hey, I guess it's time for me to be Lord of this Middle-earth. And here are the things that I really, really like about The Fall of Numenor, this book, this collection, is it really completes The Lord of the Rings. You can't get the full story of The Lord of the Rings without knowing this background of Numenor. The Lord of the Rings lore is very heavily based off of this Fall of Numenor and Sauron. There's a lot of things in Lord of the Rings that are obviously important, but are just kind of mentioned in passing, and that makes the world feel real and old, and it's really cool. But sometimes it's annoying. You're like, well, what about this? They mention the last lines of Men and Elves. They do different stuff, and just in passing, and you're like, why is this sword important? Who was Isildur besides the jerk that didn't get rid of the ring? Stuff like that. And you see in this that the sword that was broken, that you get why it's so important even more. You get Isildur was actually a really, really amazing, cool guy, and you see his adventures before he fell, because the ring, which is really cool. You even see Sauron is really scary in The Lord of the Rings, but he's not really well fleshed out. He's just this ominous presence. But you see him much more, his character much more in The Fall of Numenor, which I really enjoyed. And even his motivation at first for trying to take over Middle-earth is he's this spirit that God created with a love of order, and he sees all this chaos in Middle-earth. And of course, it becomes, because he's evil, he decides to do it his own way, not God's way, but he wants to bring about order, which in itself is a good thing, but then it just turns into this kind of devil worship is what he wants to impose. And this book really fixes one of my pet peeves about the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings movies, is the flashbacks to the last lines of Men and Elves are really disappointing to me, not to everybody, and I love those movies, those are good movies, but the flashbacks to that age aren't really good, and this book fixes that for me. I really enjoy, oh yeah, this does it much better. And in this story, there's a lot of cool sub-stories that I think are really important. Like, you may have thought, from reading The Lord of the Rings, that Tolkien has difficulties. Not everybody might have thought this, but when I was younger, especially, this is one of the criticisms I had of The Lord of the Rings, was that Tolkien can't write good relationships or good women characters. He doesn't seem to understand them. And I thought it made sense because, you know, he was raised for a good part of his life by a priest. So I was like, oh, he doesn't understand women. But you see that that's totally silly in this. The main relationships in a lot of the Silmarillion, but especially in this, are men and women, and they're done really, really well. One of the sub-stories that I really like in The Fall of Numenor is where Tolkien shows so realistically how a bad sort of feminism, there could be a good feminism, but how a bad sort of feminism that's based on hatred and envy can arise. And I really liked it because for this sort of evil thing to arise, it has to happen from good people. It's kind of like when C.S. Lewis discusses the fall of man. It has to be something that perfectly good people could do, but it also has to be really evil because the consequences are so bad, and he does this so realistically. There's these really, really good people that are really relatable to, and you want to see them succeed, but they spring forth this really bad kind of hatred and envy that would be a bad kind of feminism. I really like, and that brings me to probably one of the best things about this, is it has really, really good characters. I usually hate it when people say in a story they don't want things black and white, they want gray areas, because it usually means they want like dismissal or deconstruction or disregarding of moral truths and real goodness and real badness. That's often what it means when people say that, but this really has that ambiguity that there's really, really good characters that do really, really evil things with horrible consequences, but they remain good characters. They're good people. And that's much more real to life, because a disregarding of the moral code isn't true to life, and so it makes bad fiction. But when the moral code is there, and it's clear that it's there, but people transgress it that are good, like we're not just making this straw figure demonized character, I love that. And this story does it really, really well. It shows really well, and I've mentioned this a little bit, how relationships can go bad, and I actually think it's a good reflection for married people, some of the stories in The Fall of Numenor, because it shows that a lot of times in people's heads when their relationship is going bad, they're trying to make it this grand, these big issues and this grand tragedy, and oh, I'm the wounded party, when really if there's just a little bit of letting go of slights, letting go of what you think wrong has happened to you, and just humility, you could so easily fix it. And it also shows how if the basic unit of society, the domestic church, the family, goes bad, everything else about society is going to go bad. And it shows that so powerfully, where this one family, their domestic disputes, and it doesn't happen right away, leads to the crumbling of this paradisal area of Numenor. But the main storyline, as Tolkien said, is how great and good people, right, these Numenorians who are basically, they're not unfallen people, but they're basically an image of what Adam might have been like if he hadn't chosen evil. But how great, good people, and this reminds me of our society today, turn from being great and good and turn from true worship to devil worship. Literally, devil worship is what the Fall of Numenor is about. People turning to devil worship because they don't want to trust in God. And I really, really enjoyed that very, very, very much. Actually, the thing that stuck with me from the first time of reading the Silmarillion and from just through my life is that image they has, this devil-worshipping temple has stuck with me, just seared into my brain. And Tolkien, he had got this story of the Fall of Numenor from a dream he had that never left him. And he communicates that so well, just this, it cuts to the heart, because it cut him to the heart, this dream, and he communicates it so well, and it just stays with you and sticks with you. And this is where we get to that connection to Babel, where they want to invade and take for themselves the realm of the gods, right? And that's what Babel was all about. People wanted to physically attack heaven. They built a tower, and if you don't know the idioms in the original language, you won't know, but they, with its top in heaven, that doesn't just mean a really tall one. It means they're trying to defend against or attack heaven, right? And this story shows that really well, that temptation in our hearts to want to fight with God, thinking that he doesn't have our best interests at heart. And this book is a masterclass in foreshadowing, kind of like the Fall of Gondolin. It's funny to me that one of the things that people use to show how badly foreshadowing is done is in The Hobbit, when they're like, oh, the arrow that kills Smaug that's so important appears 2 sentences before, and you shouldn't do that, you should foreshadow it more. I don't agree that that's bad foreshadowing, but it's often used as an example. But Tolkien shows that he's a master of foreshadowing in The Fall of Gondolin and in this, because you see what's going to happen and you really, really don't want to have it happen, and it hits you so much harder when it finally does, when you see this destruction that people have been choosing finally come down and bear down upon them. It's kind of like real life. We sometimes see that in our loved ones' lives that are making bad decisions, or countries' lives, or different things like that. You see that's coming, and you really don't want it because you love this person, but boom, it comes crashing down. And that makes it so compelling. Now, there are a couple of less good parts of this book. First of all, it's curated from other of Tolkien's work. There's nothing new here. I don't really think that's bad, because it's kind of hard sometimes to get all the, to go around to all the different sources and read it. But if you're a Tolkien master, there's nothing new here for you. It's also not curated as well as Christopher Tolkien stuff. For example, they put the description of the flora and fauna and geography of the Fall of Numenor first, which is so silly. It reminds me of this old book, The Many Worlds of Paul Anderson, where the first short story is not a story per se, it's just a description of a world that Paul Anderson makes up. No story happens. And so it really comes in to play where C.S. Lewis said, it's silly to think you can't skip. You should skip if a part's not good. And I really think a lot of people should just skip the beginning flora and fauna of the Fall of Numenor and get to the story part. Because the story is what's compelling. Really, the flora and fauna should have been relegated to an appendix. So it's not as well curated as some of Christopher Tolkien stuff, but that's not a big caveat. I really hate that it is has endnotes, not footnotes. I hate endnotes because it's so hard to flip back and forth. But these are small things. Overall, it's a really good book. What I really like is that it's short. It took me 3 days while I was working and doing other stuff to finish it. On Apple Books, my wife told me it says that on average you're going to be 11 hours is how long it takes people to finish it. So it's a really short read. And I highly recommend this book. My bottom line is that I highly recommend this book, especially if you're a person that's read The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings and you want more, and you're not ready for like the Silmarillion and its kind of deep mythology. You just want more of the Lord of the Rings style. So I highly recommend it, especially for that, but I highly recommend it as a book.